All right, episode 466 with Mr. Jack Kruse is brought to you by a couple different really great products. So one is the Earthing bed sheets. We are big fans of those. If you follow us on Instagram, you probably saw us on Instagram posting what our bed looks like with those grounded bed sheets. Really great way to bring grounding and bringing up the electrons from the Earth's potential into your body and into your skin as you sleep for 8 hours. Helps to balance and re-regulate the circadian rhythms and lower inflammation. Earthing is an amazing technology. Check it out. We talked about it a little bit during the show, so check it out in our store. And we're also brought to you by the Big Berkey water filter. This thing is amazing. It has been independently tested by our friend Mike Adams, who is on episode 298 from naturalnews.com, and he posts all of that stuff. He runs through his lab out there in Texas, and he posted it gets rid of 100% of copper, 100% of arsenic, 100% of strontium, 100% of cadmium, 100% of lead, 100% of uranium. And the cool thing, too, is that we got the 2 fluoride filters on ours, too. So what's great is that you can we put well water through ours. Sometimes we'll do tap water if we have to, but we'll put the highest quality water through the Berkey and get extra filtration from the Big Berkey. So we highly recommend that if you guys are interested in and getting a great gravity-fed water filter that looks amazing. Your whole family can drink healthier water and free of toxicities and chemicals and things like that. Check it out. It's the Big Berkey water filter. Both the Earthing grounding mats and the Big Berkey are available at extremehealthradio.com/466 and in our store as well. Well, we have a special Saturday edition here of the Extreme Health Radio. Dr. Jack Kruse is on the line, and he's a very, very busy man. Got lots of stuff going on. I guess that's what happens when you're a on-call neurosurgeon. You live a busy life. So we had to get Jack on Saturday, so we're grateful to him for being on the show. And if you guys haven't heard our original show with him, let me look that up with you really quickly. That was episode... way back, 174. So if you guys want to go listen to that back in 2013. And Jack Kruse is a fascinating guy, probably one of the more fascinating people we've ever spoken to on this show. And he's a prolific individual. So get this. So this is a crazy story. He lost 77 pounds in 3 months and 133 pounds in a year, as far as I remember, without changing his diet or exercising, through something called cold thermogenesis. So he's a fascinating guy. He's a respected neurosurgeon, CEO of Optimized Life, a health and wellness company dedicated to helping patients avoid the healthcare burdens that we typically encounter as we age, and we can all attest to that. We're seeing our family and friends and fathers and mothers go through all of this as they age. And he's a member of the American Association of Neurological Surgeons, the Congress of Neurological Surgeons, and Age Management Medicine Group. Golly, so a fascinating guy. By the way, this is episode, let me get this right, 466 of Extreme Health Radio. So if you guys want to listen on the actual website or visit our sponsors or anything like that and get links to his website, you can just go to extremehealthradio.com/466. And that way you can get access to everything that we have going on the website and all of that stuff. So we appreciate you guys being on the call today. And as well, Dr. Jack Kruse, thank you so much, Jack, for being on the show today. We really appreciate this.
Hey, no problem.
Yeah, is the background music still playing for you? I hope not.
Yeah, it still is. Now it's kind of stopped. Okay,
excellent. We have a little sound issue there, no, we've gotten over that. Thank you so much for taking a Saturday. I was just explaining on the intro that if you didn't hear, that you're a busy guy, and Saturdays is really your only day to do stuff like this, right?
Yeah, well, the weekends are always better for me just because during the week, sometimes Fridays work, but Friday's my overflow day. And yesterday I actually had several members from my website actually come to New Orleans to visit me because I had never met them before. And on Fridays I kind of like to do things like that in the French Quarter. So we wound up doing that yesterday. and always makes for an interesting time, when you put someone in front of you and they start asking you questions. So we actually were doing biohacks right on the street in the middle of the French Quarter yesterday, which was kind of cool because a whole bunch of people that were around us actually sat down and wanted to listen, to this because they had never seen anything like that. We were standing outside of an outdoor cafe and talking about this. People had brought their MRIs and things like that. It was kind of actually cool.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So you're in New Orleans now on a little break. Is that the deal?
Yeah, I'm actually at my house on Bourbon Street.
Oh my gosh! So you live down there now?
Yeah.
Wow. Because last time we spoke, it was about 3 years ago, and I think you were somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, at the time I think you and I spoke, because it was a while ago. I was actually in Nashville in the process of moving. And, that was one of the, the big biohacks that I did approximately 4 years ago when I actually biohacked my local environment and found that, the environment that I was in Nashville was really kind of suboptimal for a variety of different reasons, things that, subsequently I've actually been teaching my members on my site. And I realized that I needed to get below Jackson, Mississippi, in order to keep the quantum yield in my environment pretty high. Since we all now live in a microwave oven, and that acts to steal a lot of our power in our mitochondria away. And the more you lose that, the more chance that you're going to develop illness and problems referable to it, because everything in life is about energy, and if you cannot, or your cells cannot, your tissues cannot make energy optimally, ultimately that's fundamentally you're going to get a disease process in whatever tissue, this mismatch occurs. So one of the big things I did with my family is I decided pretty much within a 3-month period of time that we were going to pick up and leave. And, if you know anything about medicine, it's very difficult to pick up, a practice that you're in for 15 years and then decide to relocate.
I can imagine.
And that's what I did. And it was not cheap. It was not fun. And I mean, not only professionally, personally, emotionally, my wife was probably ready to kill me.
Oh, man.
But it was, it was done with the long-term view. It was not done, with the short-term basis. And, now that I've settled in for 3 years, I mean, I can look back on it and say I'm kind of glad I did it.
I bet.
It makes a lot of sense. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. Today, it's October 7th, and it's 93 degrees, sunny in the French Quarter, and if I was back in Nashville, there would be absolutely no UV exposure for me at that latitude. But down here, that's not the case. So
you mentioned something, an interesting word that I kind of just said yes to, and all of our listeners probably just sort of glanced over, or maybe they got it. But you mentioned quantum yield. What is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's probably the easiest way for people to think about it is to go from something that they know. And the thing that most people, I think, learned in 3rd or 4th grade is photosynthesis. And people know that photosynthesis, how plants make energy from sunlight, and they basically turn thin air with the use of water into sugars and energy. Well, we do the same thing, but we do it a little bit differently. And this is what's counterintuitive to, I think, a lot of people. Most people know that the molecule that's used in photosynthesis is something called rubisco, but the real key molecule is the one that I think everybody knows, which is chlorophyll, in a plant. That's what makes, a leaf green. What people don't really know about chlorophyll, and, if you happen to go on my site or read some of my recent blogs, you're going to see this picture probably over the last 6 or 7 months in all the blogs that I've written to make the point to people. I show a picture of both chlorophyll and hemoglobin. And when you look at it, you are absolutely stunned to see that both are porphyrin proteins, and the only difference between the two molecules is chlorophyll has magnesium in the center, and hemoglobin has iron in the center. That's the only difference. And when you see that homology from a chemical basis, you go, well, wait a minute, we all know how photosynthesis works, but why does the blood have the exact same chemical formula, just use a different ion? And it turns out the reason for that has to do with the quantum yield. And magnesium has fewer electrons than iron does. And that's why plants are optimized to work around the yellow and blue frequencies in sunlight. And it turns out that hemoglobin, since iron has more electrons, it has 26 electrons, it's designed to work around the full spectrum of the sunlight, meaning UV all the way through IR. And that's part of the reason why animals are more complex than plants. There's other reasons from an evolutionary basis tied to this. You know, from some of your listeners who may not know this, plants evolved before animals did. So approximately, we think about 2 billion years ago is when photosynthesis first hit the planet. And most people, I think, know that the belief about current man is that we've been around, or I should say Earth's been around about 4.8 billion years. So life didn't show up on this planet until about 3.8 billion years ago, based on our best estimates. But photosynthesis showed up 2 billion years ago. And it really spiked about 650 million years ago. That's when plants started to come in. So plants really had about a 65 million year jump on the animal kingdom, because most people know that the animal kingdom, which is made up of what we call the eukaryotes, the first two kingdoms of life are bacteria and archaea.
Right.
But we come from the eukaryotic kingdom. That kingdom pretty much exploded overnight about 585 million years ago. And the key to that event was all these environmental changes. Since we were just talking about Nashville and New Orleans, you may begin to understand where this story came from. Most people don't understand in science today where the Cambrian explosion came from 600 million years ago. But we do know that it's linked to some serious environmental changes that all happened at the same time. So when photosynthesis began, we had several oxygen spikes, in the Earth's atmosphere. And those oxygen spikes led to different things. But about 650 million years ago, it led to a big spike of DHA in the oceans. It also led to a huge spike of oxygenation because the photosynthetic organisms, particularly algae and bacteria, made a shit ton of oxygen in our environment. But one of the other big changes that most people don't focus in on is the sun. The sun, we believe to be between 4 and 6 billion years old, and our sun is a special kind of star. And back then it was a young star. Well, about 2 billion years ago, it was considered a mid-age star. And if you know anything about our class star, we had a different spectral density of sunlight for the first 2.8 billion years than we do now. In other words, we didn't have as much UV light. And see, UV light has a very interesting characteristic for things as physicists have talked about. If you go back and know anything about the Big Bang Theory, they talk about the first 380 million years after the Big Bang, if you believe the Big Bang, which I don't, but I point this out because there's a teaching point here.
Okay. So you don't even believe in the Big Bang?
No, I don't.
Okay.
And I will tell you, I'm going to tell you the easy way why. Anybody who truly believes in the Big Bang needs to know all the assumptions that are made by cosmologists. And there's a new book out written by a guy named John Hand, or I should say John Hands. It's called Cosmo Sapiens. I would strongly recommend anybody who wants to know the argument against the Big Bang should read this book, because based upon what we believe to be the scientific method, it's an untenable situation. In fact, it's completely pseudoscience.
Wow.
I've said this for a very long time, and of course it's very controversial because people do not understand that if a hypothesis isn't testable, that means it's not scientific. And the Big Bang is not testable, therefore it's not scientific. So you really need to read that book to understand the argument. And I think when you do that, the cool thing about it is one of the things that the model supposes is that for the first 380,000 years, the universe was dark. And then when stars came, they started to begin to make light. And with light, specifically UV light, UV light makes things more transparent.
Okay. So
if you fast forward, to what we were talking about earlier with the Cambrian explosion, our sun is what we call a G star in terms of all the stars that we know about in the universe. Well, it turns out those stars tend to go through a midlife crisis where they increase their spectral density of sunlight. In other words, we started to make more UV light from our sun, and therefore, when the sunlight came through our atmosphere, it started to interact with ozone more, and that actually would have spiked even higher oxygen levels in the environment, not only from what was going on in the oceans with the algae and the photosynthetic bacteria.
Right.
So this is kind of what led to the explosion of life. And if you look back from an evolutionary basis, literally for the first almost 2 billion years that we know life is on this planet, the only two kingdoms that were present were, bacteria and archaea. And here's the interesting part. Bacteria and archaea to this day, UV radiation is toxic to them. But it appears when UV light showed up on this planet, likely right around the Cambrian explosion, that's when things kind of changed. And the point that I've been making to my members over the last 6 to 12 months is I've been teaching them about photonics. And see, most people don't know that much about optics or the nonlinear aspects of light. Probably the most important thing that people know about light is that it has this queer property called the duality of light, where it can act both as a particle and a wave.
Right.
And I think most people kind of know that, but they don't understand that the only type of light that the eukaryotic kingdom seems to be interested in is the nonlinear aspects of light, not the common ones we know. And those nonlinear aspects of light are actually used in modern fiber optics and communication. So sequentially over the last year for my members in webinars and in blogs, I've been teaching them how this works. And it turns out that you can only use these nonlinear aspects of light when it's the most bright intensity light. It turns out on planet Earth, that's UV light.
Okay.
So again, it puts our focus all the way back to this Cambrian explosion event when the spectral density of sunlight changed. In other words, it got stronger. So the idea that you originally asked me about the quantum yield of sunlight goes back to, well, sunlight became much more powerful about 600 million years ago, and that event coordinates with when DHA showed up in the sea, and it also coordinates when oxygen finally went from 15% to 21%, in terms of the environment, and that allowed the huge spike. Because if you know anything about the eukaryotic kingdom, we talk about mitochondria. Most people know that mitochondria is the basic power plant of the cell. Well, it turns out that cytochrome 1, the input, is where electrons from food enter, and those electrons are excited by sunlight.
Okay.
And all foods are based on the photosynthetic web on this planet. And people forget that. They always think about food like, carbs, proteins, and fats, and people on my site, we don't believe that. We look at the photosynthetic yield of food. So, for example, to make some sense of this, when I think about, say, a fig or a date, that is a food that has to grow in a high light environment. So that means there's got to be highly powered light. For example, you're not going to see a fig or a date grow in the Arctic Circle right now. It's impossible. So that code is built into our mitochondria, and that's why those food electrons enter at the input, in the beginning of mitochondria, which is called cytochrome 1. Well, the terminal electron acceptor, which is at the end of the mitochondria, is oxygen. And that's how these things all link together. And what I'm trying to do is to teach people, when you understand what happens at cytochrome 1 and you understand what happens at cytochrome 2, you basically want to begin to understand how the photosynthetic yield of your environment is designed to work and yoke with your mitochondrial dynamics and also your mitochondrial haplotype, meaning what you inherited from your mother. Because for your readers or listeners who don't know, we all inherit our mitochondria just from our mother and not from our father.
Interesting. So we only get mitochondria from our mom's side.
Correct. And that's the reason why, when people first come to my website and they write down an optimal journal, the first thing I want to know about them, I want to know about their mother and their grandmother. Why? Because it tells me a little bit about their mitochondria and what they inherited. And then I get into the depth, of kind of how they've been living their life. So if you remember when we first started all this, and you asked that simple question
right.
About photosynthetic yield, the reason why I'm so interested in photosynthetic yield, because it tells me, is the environment that you're in now matching your mitochondrial haplotype? Does it match how you came into this world? So I'll give you a good example. If you, grew up in Uganda or, in Somalia and you're on equatorial, you're going to inherit a mitochondria that is built for equatorial environment. So what does that mean? That means it's a mitochondria that doesn't uncouple. It means it doesn't make a lot of free heat because it never needs to. So that means that those people don't need to eat as much food to get the photosynthetic density they need. Now, most people on this planet today have a Northern European ancestry.
Right.
So they have uncoupled mitochondria. That means they have to eat more food because when you live outside the tropics, away from the equatorial zone, you have to generate more heat to live in those higher latitude environments. And, based on, human evolution over the last 4 to 6 million years, most humans now live outside of that East African rift where we came from.
Mm-hmm.
So that's now the dominant mitochondrial haplotypes that are out there. But by no means is it the only ones. And that's part of the reason why all this cool stuff going on now with 23andMe and people being able to order those tests and finding out, hey, here's my ancestry, here's where I'm from. The big issue is that not too many people truly understand what that data really means and how it's designed to work for you. So tying this all back to explain to you this huge biohack that I did 4 years ago, I have a Northern European ancestry in my mitochondrial DNA.
Okay.
So I'm a K haplotype. So I knew right away, and not that I didn't know this before, but part of the reason why I got really heavy is because I had this haplotype and I was doing many things in my environment that were wrong. But one of the things that made me realize once I fixed my problem is that the best way for me to maintain my health going forward was to live in an environment that gave me a higher photosynthetic yield, because as we age every decade, we gain about 10% what we call heteroplasmy rate in our mitochondria. That's just by chance alone. Everybody on this planet goes through the same thing.
That's just average.
Exactly.
Okay.
So aging fundamentally is tied to your heteroplasmy rate. And what heteroplasmy is, for those of you who don't know, I think most people know on our mitochondria we have 5-sided groups, and it's called 1, 2, 3, and 4. The two most important ones are probably the fifth one, which is the ATPase, which makes ATP. Distal to that is where the oxygen acceptor is. And cytochrome 1 is called the NAD/NADH couple. The key thing is the amount of distance between those should be between 36 to 40 angstroms. Well, heteroplasmy rate ties to the distance between those angstroms. So the more stretched out you are, like say if you get to 60 angstroms, that's how I was when I was 365 pounds. Because the further those respiratory proteins are away from each other, the less energy you can make from the foods you eat, regardless of what the foods are.
Now, how did you get that tested? How did you know that?
Well, I knew that, from my education, but the key thing is the mitochondrial science that's being produced over the last 40 years is this very famous doctor. If you don't know who he is, I'd strongly recommend that you look up some of his YouTube videos. His name is Dr. Doug Wallace, He is probably the world expert right now on mitochondrial medicine. He's at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and I've been following him literally for 40 years. He is the doctor that actually found out that all mitochondrial DNA is maternally inherited. But some of the things that he's found out over the last 10 to 15 years really are the backbone and the basis of what I teach people on my site. And he's the one that found that heteroplasmy rates increase. That's where disease comes from. So let me make sure you guys understand what I'm saying. You can come into this world with good mitochondria, and you're not going to develop disease until you're maybe 5th, 6th, or 7th decade. What Wallace has found in the diseases that he treats is children who are born to mothers with bad mitochondria to begin with get diseases in their teenage years and 20 years that we'd expect to see in 70 or 80-year-old people. So basically what he has found is that aging and illness is a function of the heteroplasmy rate. So in other words, we commonly in medicine today believe that cancer is a genetic disease. And what Wallace is fundamentally really teaching people is that all disease is functionally related to the distance that things spread on your mitochondria. In other words, genetics really aren't the focus. See, in other words, we're all born with the same genetic blueprint, but it turns out what makes those genes misbehave is the light signals and the energy signals that come from our mitochondria.
Okay. So when you look at sorry about that. When you look at a mitochondria, inside, it looks like, I just pulled it up on Google Images, and it looks like almost like a little bean cut open from the top half, and you have all these things inside of it. And so you're talking about the angstrom distance of...
Yes, on that inner, if you see the curly cues on the picture that you're probably looking at, that's called the crista. And on the crista is where those 5, sequentially, they go all the way through that whole chain, all the way around.
I see.
It's a giant chain of electron chain transport going all the way through. The interesting part of the story, in case you or your readers don't know this, where did the mitochondria come from? Well, it turns out that at this Cambrian explosion, we stole a bacteria at that time, and we turned that bacteria into a mitochondria. And how do we do that? We deleted many of its genes, and we made it so that it can only use oxygen as its terminal electron acceptor. In fact, mitochondria in humans only have 37 genes. 13 of those genes actually put together the respiratory proteins. And when I tell you that every eukaryote on this planet, their mitochondria goes back to that Cambrian event, that event was called endosymbiosis. And if you want to read a little bit about, that process, probably the most famous researcher that came up with this idea is someone named Lynn Margulis, and unfortunately she just died a couple of years ago. But she was a brilliant lady. She got a lot of flack from the paradigm that's out there, especially from what I call neo-Darwinists like Richard Dawkins and Jerry Coyne. And the reason for that, again, this goes back to that book I told you about, the Cosmo Sapiens book. When you begin to understand what we truly know and what we believe, you begin to understand that what Darwin said has been completely misrepresented by modern science. Most people who are neo-Darwinists believe that natural selection is the way that evolution had happened, but what have we been talking about literally for the first half an hour? We've been talking about how something 600 million years ago rapidly and immediately allowed the fossil record to show up on this planet. Well, natural selection's idea is that gradual speciation and gradual complexity comes up. That is completely contrary to the evidence that we have found on Earth. So that means that natural selection really can't drive evolution. It turns out if you go back and read Darwin's original work from 1859, as I've done, in that book, actually the first 6 editions say the same thing, and then it was changed about 1871. He always said that conditions of existence were far more important than natural selection. So what are conditions of existence? Well, what's the analogy to today's world? Well, that's called in the environment. It's called epigenetics.
Right, right.
And today we now know that epigenetics is crucial. And the guy that's really taught me the most has been Doug Wallace, because his whole idea is that mitochondrial energy dynamics is what controls the genome. And that means that rapid changes can occur when the environment rapidly changes.
So the mitochondrial...
Just think about what we thought about, just think about what we talked about, what happened 600 million years ago. All these environmental changes, like with UV light, DHA, and oxygen all showing up. These were tremendous effects that had huge effects on this planet.
So the mitochondria is what actually causes genetic expression to occur and what controls. So the mitochondria is another layer up from the genes?
Oh, yes. And the problem right now with the modern paradigm, as I think you know and just about all your listeners know, let's take a perfect example. Cancer. Right now, all oncologists and all research is focusing on the genome. I think all of us know that if you open up every book. But what is Wallace telling us? That is a misplaced focus. We need to be looking in the mitochondria and not the genome, because when we study cancer, we're looking at genes that have already misbehaved. So to really, truly understand cancer, we need to know what happened to those mitochondria before the cancer came.
Interesting.
And see, that's where we get into the heteroplasmic thing. And that's where we get into the distance between respiratory proteins. And the reason it becomes so interesting for me is because what do mitochondria deal with? Okay, mitochondria don't deal with the things that most of the other people, in both the healthcare paradigm or, the paleo paradigm or the food paradigm, what I call food gurus, they deal with things that are, to me, inconsequential. Mitochondria only deal with three things: electrons, protons, and photons. And that is quantum physics. So from my perspective, you need to understand a little bit of physics to understand truly what's going on inside of mitochondria. And once you begin to open yourself to that perspective, then guess what? Some of the things that are really difficult for us to answer today in medicine become much more easy to do. And all of those things that we had talked about 3 years ago when we talked last time are fundamentally tied to all the things we're talking about now. Like, for example, the lectin prescription and the cold thermogenesis protocols all tie back to how electrons, protons, and photons actually work inside of mitochondria. Now, did I tell you that 3 years ago? Did I tell any of my listeners that? No, because you were not ready to understand this complexity, because you had to go through several levels. Well, now we've peeled the onion back 40 years, and the people that have stuck with me and the people that have been listening to my webinars now understand why I'm saying what I'm saying.
Now, I find it really interesting what you said about the mitochondrial coming from the woman, and if a woman has, I'm not sure the term you use, weak mitochondria or whatever the term you used was, then the child can get sick in their teen years when they would normally have gotten sick in their 70s and 80s. That's fascinating. Well,
think about it like this. I mean, anybody who's a doctor like myself, when I first was coming into this business, we never saw Alzheimer's disease or carotid endarterectomy surgeries in people who aren't past 60 or 70 years old. Now we're able to see it in people who are 20 and 30 years old. And the reason for that is because our environment has radically changed by the things that we're using in modern communication devices.
So our environment is controlling or at least affecting the mitochondria, and that's what changes genetic expression.
Absolutely. And this is the reason why, if you go back to, say, from 1900 to 1940, and you look in the medical literature, you'll never hear the word autism. It was never even coined until 1940. Why? Because it never occurred back at those times. What's changed in the 20th century? Well, if you remember what was going on in 1890, we just figured out how to use electricity. We moved from kerosene to electric current to electric bulbs. And what do electric bulbs do? They change the spectral density of light that's in our environment. We went from an outdoor species to now we are 95 or 98% indoor, talking on frequencies of light that are what I would call radically different than what we evolved to. And this just all occurred in the last 120 years.
I think at our last... Oh, sorry about that. In our last show, we talked about how you, and I do this as well, wear those orange glasses at night to protect from the light. But yeah, it's all about the light, right?
Exactly. And now you understand why. Everything about mitochondrial dynamics comes down to three things: light, water, and magnetism. And 5 years ago, I couldn't have done a podcast with you as I'm doing now and say, Justin, I need you to read this book, that book, and that book. You had to do what I did and go back and read, the data from the literature that wasn't really correlated. Well, now you can buy books about light, water, and magnetism and read them and begin to understand that 5 years ago I may have sounded really crazy, and all of a sudden now I don't, because you're able to actually see all these articles that were written in foreign languages are now published. And Gerald Pollack has written a book called The Fourth Phase of Water, that when you read this book, and a third grader could read it, it's written very simply, but when you read it and realize the implications of what this means, and then you realize that water molecules are actually around our respiratory proteins. Water is fundamentally what shrinks the distance between our respiratory proteins when it's present. So people forget these very simple third-grade things about water. When you take a plastic bottle of water and put it in the freezer, what happens to it, Justin?
Well, it expands until eventually it explodes.
Right. You got it. So what happens when you heat water? It shrinks.
Shrinks down.
People don't realize that. So guess what? What does a mitochondria release? Aren't we called warm-blooded mammals? Releases heat. So our mitochondria is designed to release heat. Why? Because it shrinks the water that's around the respiratory proteins, and the closer the respiratory proteins come together, the more they can tunnel electrons and protons effectively. What we learn about tunneling speeds of both electrons and protons happens much more quickly the closer those particles are together.
So that's why you're so into the cold thermogenesis and the ice baths and all of that.
See that? Because when you get in the cold water, what do? You release more heat from your mitochondria to shrink your respiratory proteins so that you can take your disease and get better.
Okay, so just so that I understand this correctly, and our listeners as well, because you're an extremely intelligent guy and done a lot of research, whereas most of our listeners and myself haven't researched this as much as you have. So let me make sure I get this correct. So when the mitochondria is exposed to cold, like you're talking about in your cold thermogenesis program and the ice baths and all that, the proteins that you're talking about become inside the mitochondria, become closer together. And as a result of that, then they're able to communicate with... Is that correct?
No, then the electron speeds go from cytochrome 1 to oxygen much faster. The faster those speeds go, the less sick you get, the less fat you are.
Okay. So it's all about the cold. I mean, one of the things you talk about, though, is all about the cold.
Exactly. And that's why when you have a certain disease protocol... Now, remember, not all disease protocols are going to follow the same biohack. So, for example, for me, my big one was obesity. When I started to realize this 10 to 12 years ago, that's when I started constructing these biohacks and come up with the prescriptions for obesity. But it turns out that these also work for other diseases, because what people don't understand, and I'll give you a good analogy that I think you'll like. Realize that our bodies have each cell, like each neuron in our body, has about 3,600 mitochondria.
Okay.
Now, the number of mitochondria differ throughout each tissue in our body. So how I want you to think about mitochondria from this day forward, I want you to think about the Weather Channel, okay? And there's a reason I bring this up, because, we all just went through, watching Hurricane Matthew go up and down Florida. So I'm sure people have the Weather Channel on. And I actually was thinking about this, not realizing you and I were going to talk about it today, but I think it has a really good teaching purpose. I look at the human body just as a map of the United States. Everybody knows when they watch the Weather Channel that the weather that's in California, so that the weather that's in Florida right now is completely different compared to the weather in New Orleans. Well, it turns out that's exactly how mitochondria work in your brain, in your heart, in your fat tissue. They're all different. So fundamentally, my disease, my hurricane, was in my adipocytes. So I had to come up with a protocol to fix that problem in that area. It turns out when I did that, it had collateral effects to other things that also got better. Okay. That is not something I expected, but as I went further and further, I started to realize, wow, this can actually help lots of different diseases, which is why I fell directly into Doug Wallace's work about 12 years ago.
So why did you...
And that's when I realized this is all tied together through mitochondrial energy dynamics, and my goal at that point came to realizing I needed to teach the public about mitochondria. In fact, if you go back and look at my blogs, the first 4 blogs that I wrote before I gave up were about mitochondria. Why? Very difficult to try to explain mitochondrial dynamics to people who don't have a science background. So I decided, okay, I have to give people a narrative, a story. So that's why I did what I did. See, I'm now 5 years down the pike on the internet of teaching people this, and I'm sure if you have just heard about me today and you go read my current blog, which just got posted, yesterday on Time 24, you may feel lost, but I think when you listen to podcasts like this that give you, a quick-hand version through the last 5 years, you start to go, I've never thought about, how these things link together. And I can promise you and I can promise all your listeners, if you go and study mitochondrial dynamics, if you go buy a couple of books, that are now published about this, 5 years ago, none of my members could do that. They had to rely on me, to give them this data. Now you can go buy these books in total and read them and go, wow, this stuff is for real. Now it's just a matter of getting people up to speed and answering their questions as it relates to the current situation they're in.
What was the theory then behind moving to a warmer climate? Is it the light?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. When I shrunk my respiratory proteins, obesity turned out not to be my big issue. Okay. Any longer. I can't tell you that, I'm as trim and as fit as I would like to be, but that's also by design, because once I figured this out, I decided to use myself as a guinea pig. So I am what we call a classic biohacker. For the last 5 to 7 years, I've been doing a lot of self-experimentation to learn more about truly how quantum biology works.
Okay.
So the reason I wanted to come here is because in this environment, I'm always around strong UV light. So what does that mean? That means I can keep my respiratory proteins as tight as when I fixed them back in Nashville 10 years ago. It also allows me to play around with my own respiratory proteins to learn more about them. So, for example, if I don't use as much CT here, will I fall off the train, so to speak, as I would up in Nashville? Turns out the answer is no. Why? Because UV light's strong here, and there's no UV light at the latitude from Nashville from about September 1st all the way until April 15th. Well, here in New Orleans, we never lose UV light. In fact, where you live, you have the same issue. I'm at latitude 28, and very few people realize that there's a very small portion of the United States that actually has this built-in advantage. Well, when I realized this 10 or 12 years ago, that's when I started to plan my exit, from where I was, because I realized once I fixed my problem, in order to maintain this and limit my collateral damage from my job and the things that I had to do, I needed to be in an environment that suited my mitochondria best. And that's why I did what I did.
What areas of the United States are amenable to what you're talking about here?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. With respect to light is a three-pronged approach. It's tied to latitude, altitude, and population density. And I'll go through each one of those so your listeners understand it.
Okay.
Latitude is pretty simple. Most people know about the equator. There's always UV light present at the equatorial zones, almost from sun up to sundown, and it's very constant through 12 hours because there's not a big seasonal shift in light. As you move away from the latitude, that changes, okay? Altitude is another one. If you go above 5,000 feet, even if you live in Vancouver, you're still going to be able to make UV light. Why? Because how does UV light work? It works with powerful light from the sun hitting ozone and layer. It turns out when you go above 5,000 feet, you can increase your quantum yield for sunlight.
I see.
That's part of the reason why back in the 1940s and 50s in Switzerland, they used to tell people to put their kids outside in little cages off their windows when they were vitamin D deficient. Because even at a high latitude, the kids would get UV light because they're above 5,000 feet. The same thing's true even today in Denver. That's why Denver, Colorado tends to be relatively stable from a vitamin D perspective because they're at altitude. But where the deficit is if you're at sea level and, say, live in Nova Scotia, you're hosed. You're living in vitamin D winter for almost 8 months out of the year. So if you happen to have diseases that are associated with that, for example, that's the reason why MS goes up way higher the further you get away from the equator, because these people have a huge quantum yield problem. And they usually have a mitochondrial haplotype that doesn't link to it. It also turns out that's the reason why it follows often with obesity. It's also the reason why it follows along with neurodegeneration. There's a lot of diseases that fall along these same pathways. And when you begin to understand how these things are linked, then you become smarter and you can actually do biohacks to fix the problem.
Yeah. Now, if you're talking about like biohacks, if you're living in an area like that and somehow can't get out for some reason, there are things you can do. Is that correct?
Well, the number one thing to do is try, if you have to stay in your local town, try to move to a place where the altitude is highest. Okay. But here's the other part. I haven't told you the other part yet, and this is really bad news for a guy like you. Population density is the other effect, and this is a new effect. And this effect really comes because of our modern communication devices, because each human being in the United States uses, on average, about 7 wireless devices to connect. And it turns out that wireless devices affect your vitamin D status because it dehydrates cells. So let's try to explain this to people very simply without going through a lot of crazy science. You think about that used piece of steak that your wife cooked the night before, and you want to heat it up, and you put it in a microwave. What happens? If you don't wrap it in a piece of cloth with water on it, it tastes like shoe leather. Why? Because it gets dehydrated. Well, I want you to fast forward to thinking about if you're at LAX getting on a plane with 250 obedient idiots all using their phone or their iPad or anything else, and you're in a metal tube. You're basically the piece of steak. The same thing turns out to be true if you live in San Francisco or Silicon Valley or in LA when you have 10 million people connecting to cell phone devices that have, antennas in their phones from their Wi-Fi devices. And this is the reason why we're starting to see some very interesting changes within cities. And that's the reason why there's this global pandemic of vitamin D pathology that's out there. And people don't realize that it's tied to the effect of us being chronically dehydrated.
Okay, so let me make sure I get this correct. So when people are so densely put together, now this what you're saying is that it has an effect because primarily of all of these wireless devices, but assuming...
Well, it's not just the wireless devices. It's also blue light from these devices. Remember that all man-made diseases, I should say all man-made bulbs, that means incandescence, fluorescence, and the new LEDs have huge spikes of blue light. What do we know about blue light exposure through the eyes in humans? It actually causes mitochondrial heteroplasmy. So if you want to do a Google study after listening to this podcast, go look up the Asian myopic issue. All the kids in Asia have myopia. It's almost 96% is the rate. 1960, the rate was only about 40%. What's the difference? Everybody's on a cell phone now that's got chronic blue light exposure. What does that do? It elongates your eye, it changes things, and guess how the eye works? We have a thing in our eye called the eye clock. That eye clock controls circadian biology. What does that do? It actually increases your heteroplasmy rate, so you get sicker. So myopia is one of the first signs that you've got a really big problem that eventually can lead to other mitochondrial problems as it goes from your eye to your frontal lobes to your brain. And see, that was one of the things that I realized about me. What drove my fatness was through my training, I was constantly in blue light. I was in the operating room. I learned in a classroom. I was never outside.
Right.
In residency, for 7 years doing neurosurgery, I was always in a hospital. And the bulbs in the hospital went from incandescence to fluorescence, and now they're LEDs. And it turns out LEDs are worse.
Mm-hmm.
And, in LA where you're at, dude, every big American city has switched their bulbs out to LED. Why? Because LED bulbs have no UV and no IR light.
Uh-huh.
So they're using blue to drive it. Why? Because it's cheaper on an energy basis, but it turns out that subtraction of UV and IR is what gets us sick. So then we're back to that quantum yield thing again. So
I want to make sure that I understand this correctly. So what you're saying is, in terms of
let me finish this one thought.
Oh, right.
This is important for you to hear.
Okay.
For all your listeners who think that this is hocus pocus, realize that one of my GE light engineer buddies, who's a co-inventor of a product with me, have been working behind the scenes with people at GE. And don't you think a white paper was written about this issue in 2009? It was just published by the AMA, literally May of 2016, that LED light likely has humongous effects on human biology. And the Washington Post just published something about it 2 weeks ago. The AMA now has a position paper out about this. So this is no longer Jack Kruse's opinion. People are beginning to understand what I've been saying, and that's really, really important. So the goal for you now, your listeners, is that you need to take this information and do something with it. In other words, change your lighting lifestyle. The light that you live under needs to be sunlight. That's why this quantum yield is a huge big deal. But today, most modern humans live under blue light. Mm-hmm. And blue light is horribly toxic for our biology because it stretches out the respiratory proteins on our mitochondria.
And it also causes dehydration of the same area, is that correct?
You got it.
Okay.
Right, because blue light is just like non-native EMF. Remember, light is light, but the frequencies are the key. And this is what people don't understand about physics. And that's what makes my job a little bit tougher, because I have to explain to people that blue light, in my opinion, is the number one worst non-native EMF we have. But remember, wireless also runs on light frequencies, but they're a little bit different than blue. Uh-huh. But the crazy part is almost every display screen that we have is it's got 4 times the amount of blue color temperature that the sun has. See, the sun is very interesting. The sun has blue frequencies in it, but the antidote to blue in the sun is the red light that's present. And that red light has been subtracted from the bulbs that our government now wants us to use.
I see.
And this is the reason why kids and young people are getting so sick, because they're the early adopters of this technology. And that's the reason why doctors now are seeing kids with strokes, and why we have this infertility across the board in young people.
Wow, that's so
And people are not making these links.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So what are your thoughts about blue? Like, you know how you talked about flux on your computers and things, and flux will...
Yeah, that's not good enough, though.
I know. I remember you saying before that you wanted to use flux along with the glasses, but what are your thoughts about blue light on computer screens in the daytime? Is that also bad?
They're horrible. And see, I'm glad you brought this up, because there was just this big biohacking event that went down in Pasadena with this guy, and many of my members went to it, and they actually called me from the event, and they were appalled with some of the information they were getting from this event, because, remember, blue light is stimulatory. Normally, like in morning sunlight, blue light is actually what wakes us up.
Okay.
It's also what stimulates our pituitary gland to release hormones. What people don't realize, though, is the color temperature of blue light in the sun at sunrise, about 1800 Kelvin. Here's the problem. The color temperature in every technology screen is 6500 Kelvin. So, Justin, if you use non-native blue light, it's 4 times the color temperature. What do you think would happen after the first decade of your life? Now, just think about all the mothers out there that are handing their kids cell phones and iPads. This drains their pituitary gland of all their hormones. That's the reason why these kids are infertile. That's the reason why OBGYNs now are having to give ladies Clomid to get pregnant. And this is the problem. People do not understand light as they need to understand it. And they think that sunlight and the light that we use is equivalent, and nothing can be further from the truth. And the reason why this blue situation from this event was big is because we have photoreceptors in our eye. We have 4 different light pathways in our eye, okay? But the two that, I think the one that you know the best is the eye camera. That means camera vision. Our photoreceptors in our eye are optimized to work around the yellow frequency. So we tend to use blue, yellow, green, and red to see, okay?
Okay.
But what people don't realize is that we have another system called the melanopsin system. And the daytime color vision that we all use is done by the cones of the eye. While at night vision, it's run by melanopsin. And melanopsin, its photoreceptor, works between 435 and 465, which is dead in the blue range. Well, guess what? You regenerate cones at night, and you regenerate melanopsin during the day. So think about what you just asked me. Well, Doc, if everybody's using technology during the day, and that's when we're supposed to regenerate melanopsin, 435 to 465, if you have 4 times the amount of blue color temperature, what the hell do you think you're doing to those receptors? And that's the reason why everybody's getting sick, because that melanopsin system controls the central retinal pathway, which controls mitochondrial density almost everywhere in your body. So guess what? That's the reason why growth and metabolism processes in humans is being destroyed, because of our modern beliefs tied to how we communicate and how we're lighting our environment. And it's so innocuous, most people look past it. And why do they look past it, Justin? Because they don't understand how cones and rods work in our eye.
So what were they saying at the conference were they saying the blue light during the day?
I'll give you the perfect example. The gentleman that ran the conference named Dave Asprey, he showed a picture of him waking up in the morning in blue light in his room, utilizing fake blue light, and told everybody in the conference it was a great thing to do. And of course, I had 5 or 6 members there. Literally, from the conference, they called me on the phone and said, Jack, you're not going to believe what he's telling people. And the reason why I bring this up here, because it's extremely important for you and your listeners to understand, Dave's a very influential guy. But Dave's not a scientist, okay? He's a marketer, and he's going to use this information to sell people stuff. I'm trying to get people well. And I'm just going to tell you right now, when you use fake blue light during the day, it's as damaging as putting blue light on at night. In fact, in my belief, I think it's worse, because how we know how melanopsin regenerates the photoreceptors in the daytime in this system. And it turns out this melanopsin system is extremely important for all growth and metabolism. So what is ultimately going to be the cause if people listen to this nonsense? They're going to get sicker quicker. They're not going to get better. Instead of being the bulletproof executive, you're going to be a guy 50 years old that drops dead of a heart attack, and no one's going to know why. And these are the reasons why it makes my job kind of interesting, because I guess you could put it out there as maybe I'm a villain, to these guys who are biohackers, but that's not really my goal. My goal is for people to get the science right, because I believe when you explain the science to people, regular Joes, I look at it like this. If I could have learned this stuff, because I didn't learn any of this stuff in medical school, I believe anybody can learn it. It's just a matter of, do you want to apply it and understand it? And once you do, that's where your passion starts to come. When you start to really help people and you see them get better, and the application of the science is not very hard. I mean, what's the hardest thing, Justin? What I'm doing right now, I'm actually standing on Bourbon Street with no shoes on in the sunlight as I talk to you, as the leaves are blowing right around.
Nice.
And that's the kind of environment we want. Why? Because you and I are talking on an electronic device. We've been doing it for a while, so I know this communication is actually killing you and killing me. So I need to do something to offset it. So that's why occasionally I come out here to recharge photoelectrically in the sun, to offset that. And it goes exactly to the same story that I was mentioning to you about Asprey and his conference. I want people to know why this is a problem. You can still buy his stuff that he's selling if that's what you want to do, but I want you to get the real reasons correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm passionate about this because in my own profession, many of the things that we're telling people the last 40, 50, 60 years has also been wrong, and it's part of the reason why people are getting sicker. And until we remedy those rights, no one's going to get better. And I think most people know when they go, to the doctor and say they have type 2 diabetes and they get, told, hey, take a statin, take this medicine, take that medicine, you don't really get better. You're just treating the symptoms. You're not getting to the core issue of why their mitochondria is shot. And that's the problem.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. What would you recommend then to people who have to work on computers in the day, which is almost all of us?
Well, if you had been a friend of mine on Facebook, you would have seen what I did yesterday. I actually had my Blue Tech DPI tinted glasses on, and I actually did a live feed as I walked through, and that's exactly what I was talking about. I showed people drinking inside of a bar in the middle of the day, and I said all they need to do is take their sunglasses off, come outside, and maybe take their shirt off for 15 or 20 minutes. You just need to understand how to get back into nature. This is a simple thing I can tell you. I want you to think about when you came out your mama. You came out naked, with no clothes on, no sunglasses. And today in California, you can't find anybody walking around without any clothes on. Most of those people are inside in blue light. And when they do come outside, they look like Kim Kardashian. Sunblock on their skin and sunglasses on their eyes. Every single one of those things decreases the spectral density of sunlight. So are we designed to be under an alien sun, or are we designed to be under the sun that we evolved with?
Yeah,
when you begin to understand that, then it's simple. And the same thing with our water supply. I always tell people, water is pretty simple. Just make sure it's water that doesn't have fluoride in it. And remember, fluoride came from man.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unfortunately, where you live, there's a higher fluoride content in the natural water out there.
Uh-huh.
So I tell people, if you live in a place like that, don't drink, municipal water. Go to findaspring.com
mm-hmm.
and drink spring water. In California, there's a very famous podcaster that's out your way. He runs something called the House of Style. He's in, the L.A. industry. His name's Luke Story.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy goes up to a mountain outside of L.A. and with a pickup truck and collects like 300 to 400 gallons of water per week. That's what he drinks. Now, you don't have to be that radical as Luke, but you could go and buy Green Mountain Valley water or go buy Gerstenliner water, spring water from the store. It's that important. I tell people it's more important to get good quality water than it is to take your prescription medicines you get from the doctor. Why? Because of what we talked about earlier. It shrinks the respiratory proteins on mitochondria. Nothing is more important than that.
Wow. So, I like what you're saying, because what you're saying is essentially mimicking nature, but you're giving the science as to why all this stuff is the way it is, right?
Right. The last one is magnetism, and this one's the simplest one. It's the hardest one to understand, the physics.
Okay.
But we're not going to talk about that today, but I'll tell you exactly how you do it. Go outside with no shoes on. It's called grounding. And the way grounding works, if you want to know a little bit of the science, it's very simple. The sun is a cathode ray. The planets are an anode. As cathode rays come from the sun and hit the Earth's surface, it releases free electrons. What did we say earlier about mitochondria? All food comes from electrons. So guess what? We're back to that electron story. So the more free electrons you capture through either your hands or your feet, that means the less that you need from food. That's how grounding works. So walking outside on the beach where you are,
mm-hmm.
hopefully you'll listen to me after this podcast and go walk in the beach with your feet in the water, with your shirt off in the sun, not having sunglasses on. If you do that, that's all you got to do. And it's not that hard.
Super simple.
And the physical process that controls grounding is a nonlinear effect of light. It's called the inverse Hall magnetic spin effect. And I only mention that not to be braggadocious. It's for your listeners who've never heard this before. I'm sure they've heard of grounding,
mm-hmm.
but they didn't know there was a process that was nonlinear aspect of light that controls it. That's what I teach people. I teach people exactly how these things work.
That's so fascinating, because one of the things I've been doing recently, is we recently moved and now we have a big backyard and I can, so I'm a big gym workout guy. And so I love working out. But the problem with working out in the gym.
That's the wrong thing to do. You need to work out outside. You need to take the lesson from the Venice Beach guys. The reason why I don't hammer the Venice Beach guys outside of their testosterone that they're shooting, they work out in sunlight. Anybody who works out in the gym, I'm going to tell you, one of the stupidest things you could ever do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. I'm so excited now because since we've been here, I've gotten some workout equipment and now I work out outside in the sun without a shirt on, without glasses, without shoes, and I'm standing in the grass and I'm doing my whole workout outside now.
All right, and I will tell you that you'll find that exercise efficiency is much higher outdoors than it is indoors. You'll find out that you have to work out 4 to 5 times as much when you're in a gym. Why? Under blue light, not grounded. You're completely screwing the pooch when you do it. Mm-hmm. And people should like that because most people don't like to work out. And, you know, I tell most of my diabetic patients, the best workout you could ever do for yourself is get as naked as you can do, take your shoes off and walk at the edge of the water in the ocean. That's you're bringing all the 3 points that your mitochondria need, light, water, and magnetism together. And that's why I said understanding the quantum physics behind how mitochondria work is very difficult, but the application is so incredibly simple.
It couldn't be more simple.
The problem is you just have to get people to change their attitudes and perspectives about how we live our modern world. And that's really the key. One
question I have for you, and this is something I've always wondered about. Is it possible to get grounded if you're walking on concrete?
Yeah, it is. The only type of surface that you really can't ground well on is anything made out of petrochemicals. So, for example, if your streets are blacktop, try not to walk on those, but concrete's perfectly fine.
Okay.
Because concrete has mostly stones, and the stones still transmit. Obviously, the best grounding surface on the planet is the ocean. And so anybody, like where you are, the Pacific Ocean is absolutely phenomenal. Second best thing is just walking at the edge of the beach in the sand.
Okay.
So you have a built-in advantage. Not only that, your Pacific Ocean is the ideal temperature for CT. It's between 50 and 55 degrees. Right now, here in New Orleans, when I go to the Gulf, which is not that far away, Justin, it's October 7th, the Gulf temperature is 90 degrees.
Oh, man, I can imagine.
So the best time for us, like when I go down to Destin in the Panhandle around Thanksgiving and Christmas time, the water gets to about 55 to 60 degrees, and it's only that way for not very long. So there's a huge advantage for people out in the Pacific Ocean, but the problem that I have found is most of my California members, they give it lip service, but they don't use the best CT device that they have, which is the ocean.
Yeah.
And it's pretty simple. That's all you need to do. And if you can't use the ocean, like say you live inland, like at Palm Springs, well then do it in your bathtub. I mean, you can do it these different ways. But the one thing, the take-home message that I want everybody to really understand is that mitochondrial energy dynamics is best when you're in nature. Do not forget. But that is really my take-home point.
Okay.
And if you want to learn about all the different nuances of this, then I'd say become a member of my site, and I will teach you like you will not believe. And you'll be able to explain this to anybody. And I'll point you to books that you can read for things that you just find unfathomable. If you heard anything today that you just don't believe, I'll point you exactly where you need to go. And you can do the same thing on my website, on my forum. It's all there.
Can I ask you before, so people want to get access to that, your membership website is linked to from jackkruse.com, and that's Kruse, jackkruse.com, right?
Right, and they have different memberships. There's a free membership called the Bronze. That you don't get any access to the webinars. I do monthly webinars that teach pretty high level. Like we get into the details of how things work.
Okay.
For example, I'll give you a perfect example. I just did the October webinar, and it was about one of the nonlinear aspects of light called the Faraday effect, and how the Faraday effect actually works with protein side chains so that the side chains on your proteins are antennas that work wirelessly with your mitochondria and with your DNA. And we actually talk about physically how that works.
That's fascinating. So you're going deep.
Oh yeah, I don't believe that that people just want to know what we talked about today. I mean, if you think about our first discussion that we had 3 or 4 years ago and where we are now, there's a huge progression. Why? I'm teaching everybody everything I know. I am emptying, the tank. And for those of your members who are really interested in this, one of my members, long-term members, challenged me April of this year. He's like, dude, I want you to tell us what the end game is.
Yeah.
Meaning, what was the last thing that I ever wrote in the quilt document?
Uh-huh.
And I thought about it for a good month, and I said, look, if I give you the last thing I ever wrote, none of you, with the exception maybe 1 or 2, will understand it because there's a lot of territory we haven't covered between now and then. And they kept asking for it. They really wanted to know the end game. So in April of 2016, I gave a 3-hour webinar when I was sitting in my backyard, and I told people the end game. And when they heard it, they were floored.
Now, can people get access to those webinars still in your membership area? Okay.
Yeah, when you're a platinum or gold member, you have full access. Even silver members have access. The problem with silver is you get to hear it once and that's it. But there's also a Q&A that occurs after every webinar. So, for example, some of my Q&As go on for 2 or 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
And that's where members get to ask me questions, kind of like you and I are talking back and forth right now.
Uh-huh. I
have people call in from all over the world to ask me about this, about that, them constructing biohacks. They ask me questions about the current webinar or even former webinars when their knowledge increases and they start to ask really good questions. It's almost really classic. Some of my long-term members, they're phenomenal in terms of how their knowledge is improved. And see, that's what my goal is. I call those people starfish because when you meet one of them and you talk to them, it's almost like you're going to be talking to me. Why? Because they begin to understand it. And I have the firm belief that you don't need to go to medical school, you don't need to be quantum physicist to know these basic fundamental things. I think this is how our species works. And if you're curious, I'm going to teach it to you.
I love that.
My place may not be for people who are not curious. If you want, the drive-through 30-second message, I do have a classic Instagram post that has the top 6 healers. Go and find my Instagram account and look for it. You'll see it, and that's it. But I don't think that most people are curious. They can just say, well, why are these top 6 what they are? It always leads to more questions.
Right.
But I think today, what you and I talked about kind of kicked the can off the top of that.
I like that. I like that you're going deep with that. And just a couple quick questions before we leave. If someone signs up to become a member, how much content is available for them at the outset if they become, let's say, like a silver member?
Well, silver member, you get, current webinars going forward. You can't go back and listen to the old ones.
Oh, right.
Gold and platinum, you get to go back and listen to the whole catalog, and you can listen to them as many times as you want. Okay.
And how much is in there for a gold member? Just hours and hours and hours?
Dude, it's almost overwhelming. Not only that, I also have private secret groups on Facebook that is dedicated just for those members interacting with me on a one-on-one basis.
Wow. Okay, that's awesome for people to know because sometimes people wonder how much content they're going to get access to. If you have a couple more minutes, I want to ask you about a couple more simple application takeaways. But before that, because we talked about walking on the sand and simple things people can do. But before that, if you have a second, I saw your launch recently of the Quantlet, and I wanted to ask you. I figured you
were going to want to talk about that.
What's that?
I said I figured you were going to want to talk about that.
Yeah, I was just curious. I'm a big fan of gadgets and things to make you healthier and all that. Can you just describe what that? I mean, I know it would probably take an hour or two to describe what it does, but what is that thing?
Well, I just got finished telling you over the last hour that basically the modern world is diminishing our quantum yield of information that's delivered to our mitochondria. So me and a GE light engineer co-invented a device that's worn over your radial artery, and there's reasons why we picked that area specifically. What it's designed to do delivers specific light frequencies directly through your skin into your radial artery to affect the hemoglobin in your blood. At the same time, it actually cools the blood so that you assimilate more light more light frequency. So what people don't realize in physics, your pupil is what we call a perfect black box radiator. In other words, light can enter and exit. Well, I looked for almost 5 years for a part of the human anatomy where I could find a really good imperfect black box radiator so that we could add the frequencies of light back that we were missing to improve mitochondrial function. And it turns out the radial artery is a really good one. And where I got the idea was actually from your neck in the woods. In Stanford University, about 2007, they came up with a device that looks like a huge catcher's mitt that they put on all the Olympic athletes. And they found when they used this device, they improved their performance by about 30%. Now, obviously, they couldn't wear the device when they were doing their work because this thing was huge. So I got the idea, after looking at their design, that if we use light and cold frequency, we can actually shrink this device down to something that would look like a watch. And that's precisely what we did. And when we got the idea, we decided instead of going to industry with it, we put it on Indiegogo. And within 30 days, we sold everything out. And the device was due to deliver actually right around now, beginning of November. But we've had an issue with the batteries, and the delivery date will probably be towards the end of 2006. You can still purchase the device because it's not been released yet. But it's probably the first quantum wearable device that takes into effect all of these different things that we talked about today.
Wow, and you can wear that 24/7?
Well, you can wear it all different times. We want people to use it, biohack it, but we think the best time to wear it is going to be during wakefulness, not during sleep.
Okay. That's fascinating.
And there's reasons for that. Obviously, the reasons are tied, to some of those quantum aspects. And like I said, people who are interested in this, when they get on like Q&As and they talk to us, or they see us at a trade event, or they come to one of my talks that I give all over the world, this is like a huge topic. People are very, very interested in this because they begin to understand what we're trying to do. We're actually trying to bring sunlight and cold directly into your environment so that you can biohack the bad things that our modern life gives us.
That's amazing. So it's linked to, it looks like right now on the sidebar of your jackkruse.com, and it's a pretty affordable price for what it does.
Right.
Yeah, interesting.
And we haven't even told everybody what it truly can do. We actually have a couple of surprises when people get it delivered, because we're trying to over-deliver on our promises.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to tell you what those are, but I think when everybody gets their device, especially the beta devices, they're going to be very happy.
Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, it's interesting because it looks like a watch, but it has no time on it. It's pretty cool.
Well, the picture that you see there is an older version of the device. It's not even going to look like that. It's even better.
I'm on the quantlet.com. Is that it's going to look different than that? Okay.
Oh yeah, it will.
Wow, this is really cool. Yeah, I'm really into stuff like this, stuff to help you get healthier. Okay, a couple other questions I wanted to ask you just before we leave, because I know you're a busy guy and you want to enjoy your Saturday. Aside from walking on the earth and being grounded, getting sunlight, getting fresh air, drinking water, like right now I'm at a standing desk. I try to do things like that to make sure I'm limiting the effects of this modern sort of lifestyle. What other things can people do that are really easy, applicable ways that you're talking about to bring all this into their life?
Open the window.
Okay.
Let the sun in. Remember that just a pane of glass actually blocks UV light. So if you open the window, even a little crack, when you're driving in your car, open the window. You can still leave the air conditioning on. Just crack open that window. Don't wear sunglasses.
Okay.
When you are working at that standing desk, when you have a chance to go out and you tell your colleagues, I'm going to get a coffee, you don't need to drink the coffee. Just go out, even for 4 or 5 minutes, outside. Let the sunlight hit your eyes. When you go out for lunch, make sure you eat outside. Get out of that office. As much as you can get out and away from other people, That's good. The other thing is one of the things that you'll find on my Instagram quote site, when you get to that one that tells you about the 6 best healers, you'll notice the bottom one that says friends. Make sure that you have people you care about that you share this kind of information with. Why? Because we are a social species, and I think it's tragic these days when you go into a Starbucks and everybody's inside on these wireless devices. Nobody's sitting outside and nobody's talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
We need to get back to that human communication. I mean, for example, you and I talking between New Orleans and California, obviously there's a huge advantage for both you and me and your listeners, but I want people to take some of the information that we talked about today and go to a coffee shop and talk to a stranger about this. You know, say, hey, you know, these things you do. Like, for example, when I leave you, I know exactly where I'm going. Going to a place to have oysters,
mm-hmm.
where I can take my feet off, I should say take my shoes off,
mm-hmm.
and put my feet directly on cobblestones in sunlight. That's exactly what I'm going to do. And every time I do that, invariably people come up and say, this is so unusual. Why are you doing this? And it starts a conversation. Just like I told you at the beginning of this podcast. It happened yesterday. We were biohacking people on the street, and random tourists just asked, can I pull up a chair and listen and learn? And see, didn't require a wireless device. They were interested. And that's all you need to do. We just need to realize we need to reconnect with our environment. And the more you connect with it, the more you connect with people, the higher your dopamine level is going to be, and the more easy these principles become.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so simple. Like you're saying, there's a lot of science that goes behind all the principles you're talking about. But man, the application side of what you're talking about, it couldn't be any more simple. It's just basically get back to nature, right?
That's it.
Yeah, it just makes so much sense. Well, Doc, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for spending some time with me. When you're eating your oysters, I'll be out in the backyard working out.
There you go.
Yeah,
Love to hear it.
Both outside. So thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it, Doc.
Hey, anytime.
Okay, hang on the line really quickly. I'm just going to close out the show. I want to thank everybody for joining us. What an awesome show that was. Amazing guy, Dr. Jack Kruse. Make sure to check out his website, Jack Kruse, JackKruse.com. And if you're just can't remember that, just go to extremehealthradio.com/466, and you can click on the links there, and I'll put links to a bunch of the stuff that we're talking about today. Wow, what an amazing information, and I think we're going to have him on again. He's just such a wealth of information. So if you enjoyed that, please share it with your friends. We would greatly appreciate that. I know Dr. Jack would, and we would as well. That would help all of us get our message out to more people to disconnect and live more in tune with nature. So we thank you guys so much for listening, sharing our show, and being a part of everything we have going on in our lives. Appreciate it so much, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Okay, episode 466 with Mr. Jack Kruse. What did you guys think about that one, man? Whew. Man, oh man. I'd highly recommend, if you like that show, go over to listen to episode 174 of our show with him. That was back in November of 2013. I think we need to have him on again. I think he's one of the more fascinating guys we've ever spoken to on the show. Somehow we get connected up with the best people in the world, I tell you. These people are just incredible. Curious what you guys think about everything he talked about. I mean, there's really a lot of science, and, you know, once I sort of wound him up and got him going, he's got such a technical mind and such a mind filled with so much information that it was difficult to sort of have a flowing conversation with him, because he's just got so much in his, wouldn't say in his brain, but wherever your mind lives, that's where he's got all of his information, and you can tell he's super smart, man. Whoa. So the first time we talked about the leptin protocol, and we talked about cold thermogenesis, and I want to share with you something that Luke was telling me. Dr. Kruse was talking about Luke's story, and we actually had him on the show. Let me make sure I get that episode number. And by the way, if you're new to our show, all you have to do to find, we number all of our shows so that they're really easy for you to find. So if you type in extremehealthradio.com/ and any number, the number of the show, just the number itself, you'll get to it. And Luke's story was episode 464. And Luke was telling me, we had that one in studio. It was on video, so there's a video version of that one with Luke's story. But what he was telling me about some cool ideas for biohacking the cold like ice baths and things that Wim Hof talks about. He's the Iceman, WIMHOF. But Luke was telling me a really cool idea about that, because I've been thinking for a long time, I want to get like an ice bath, but then you go on Amazon and they're really expensive. You get those metal ones, or you can get inflatable ones, but then you got to fill it up with ice. And I just thought, it's kind of difficult to do. So what Luke was telling me that he does is in alignment with being a biohacker and all that. But what he does is he bought one of those freezers that you can get for your garage. And a lot of times people that hunt, or people that have lots of frozen items that they keep in their garage, and they have one of those horizontal freezers that lay flat. So you open the lid up, almost like the lid opens from your waist on up, and it's looks like a bathtub basically. And I forget what they call those horizontal freezers or something like that. But you can buy one of those for $300 or $400 on Amazon. And what you do is you can just fill it with water, and it keeps the water like 40 degrees all the time. So you don't have to put ice, and you don't have to, maybe every now and then you'd want to make sure that you change the water out, because, essentially when it's that cold, it's not going to be growing that many organisms in there. And, what you could do to prevent having to refill that water is you could just take a bath, or a shower, and just make sure you scrub yourself really clean so you don't have a lot of those oils. Even those oils are really good for you, but if you wanted to prevent doing that. But all you got to do, if you got a whole house water filter, and just fill that thing up with water, keep it in your backyard, and you can just get in that thing and 40-degree water, that would be amazing. So I think I'm going to try that as soon as we can free up a couple $100. I think that might be kind of cool to do. So yeah, Luke Story is an awesome guy. He was episode 464. Interesting. Dr. Jack Kruse, I just think he's so interesting, isn't he? I liked what we talked about light. I really liked that. And I liked what he described about the mitochondria, because I didn't really understand. I got some products from Divine Superconductor the other day. And I would highly recommend following him on Instagram or YouTube. He puts out a lot of videos on YouTube. And he has a mitochondria cocktail. I don't know the ingredients. Let me see if I can find the ingredients here. Divine Superconductor. Sorry, as I type as I'm doing this here. But he's got a product called... What is it called? He just sent it to me, and I haven't started taking it. Mitochondria cocktail. And so it really reminded me of the things that Dr. Jack Kruse was talking about, because if it's our mitochondria, I got to learn more about what the mitochondria does. I mean, I understand what Jack was saying about how it determines genetic expression. So I got that. So essentially, it's more important than the genes. And the other thing I wanted to ask Jack about, darn, I forgot, is when he talks about environment, I was curious, because with environment, there's a couple different types, right? There's internal and external. And I was wondering if some of the things that he was talking about in terms of mitochondrial, I don't even know the name to say, expression, or how it affects the mitochondria. I want to know if the internal environment affects that as well. So that's like being happy, being fulfilled, doing the work that you are called to do, being fulfilled in that way, having relationships, laughing, having a positive mindset. I'm curious. I would have to think that by him describing environment, it doesn't necessarily only include our outdoor physical environment, things on the outside of our skin. I'm assuming that it's both inside, internal, and external. So cultivating the ability to be happy and to be fulfilled and to have fulfilling relationships and doing those things that make you internally happy, I'm sure is going to be just as equally important as the external environment, like being grounded or not being around people with Wi-Fi and negative people and stuff like that. So there's got to be that component too, but I forgot to ask Jack that. We're going to have Jack back on the show. I tell you, this guy is prolific. Yeah, Divine Superconductor, you can follow him on Instagram. We follow him on there too, and he's always doing wacky things. He's scrubbing his skin down with, what is he doing? Vodka and putting on magnesium bicarbonate on his skin. Such an interesting guy. I'm just laughing. Look at these photos. He's so awesome. I love it. It's so cool that, he made a video the other day of this paste that I want to make, kind of like essentially superfood paste with ghee and coconut oil. If you go on YouTube, you can find it. But yeah, I'm going to start doing some of that stuff he's doing. So follow him on Instagram. Follow Jack Kruse too. During the show, I actually just followed him on Facebook, and I made sure, I don't know if you guys know this, but when you follow people on Facebook, you can, there's a little drop down box, and it says something to the effect of default, and then it says like first in feed or view feed or something like that. So make sure if you follow us, I was going to tell you to follow Jack, but follow Jack and make sure you see his posts so you can get to know him more and what he's doing. I'm really interested in this Quantlet too, because as you guys know, I love gadgets and I love little things that you can wear. Because this is what I love. I love easy, simple stuff. Like right now, I have a standing desk. It's in our store, the one that I have, and it's something that you do, but I'm not working hard to do it, or I'm not, I love things like a grounded bed sheets. I love things that are easy that take zero effort. That is, completely simple and easy to do. You're going to lay down in your bed anyway. Why not have it be a grounded bed sheet, right? So simple, easy stuff like that I just love stuff like that. So wearing a watch, gosh, how hard can that be? Right now I have one of those EMF pendants on, the Q-Link, things like that. I don't know if they work. I have no idea. And so I just wear them anyway. Why not? Why not do as much as you can? So hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Dr. Jack Kruse. If you're unfamiliar with our website, we do shows 4 days a week. Actually, is it 4? No, it's 3 days a week. Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, with alternative health practitioners, people like Dr. Jack Kruse, people on the just on the fringe, on really doing cutting edge work, because I think that's where we're going as a culture. We need to dive deep into these issues and really figure out what's going on with our health and why we're becoming degened. We have chronic degenerative diseases, right? So there's a reason why we're becoming degened. Perhaps it's what Dr. Jack Kruse is saying is our mitochondria, the space between, gosh, I can't even remember the terms, but the respiratory space between the photons, electrons in the mitochondria is becoming pulled apart and unable to communicate as well, and that affects genetic expression. So we get genetic diseases and degenerative diseases like kids coming down with cancer, leukemias when they're 12 and 13 instead of people when they're 70s and 80s. And a lot of what he said makes sense. Super, super interesting. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Yeah, we do shows 3 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Friday. And if you guys want to join, if you guys want to go deeper and get your health questions answered, you can follow us on, actually, you can go to extremehealthradio.com/466. And we have a membership site as well called Perpetual Healing with 2 really cutting-edge doctors that I think are on the cutting edge of where disease is really coming from. Amazing. So if you guys are interested in that, you can go to extremehealthradio.com/466, and there'll be a link to Perpetual Healing. But in any event, man, I just think that he's doing such amazing work. I love what he's doing. So go follow him on Facebook, sign up to his newsletter. I signed up there as well, and follow what he has going on, and go join his membership site too. I think he's got some really, probably some of the most cutting edge information you're ever going to find. So check him out and check that out. Thank you guys. We love you. Thank you for your support on Patreon. For those of you who have been supporting us on Patreon, thank you for that. My goodness, we couldn't do the show without you. Thank you for supporting us on Amazon. Patreon, by the way, is a website where you can donate to us like 25 cents a show, 50 cents a show, and it comes out of your account once a month. And it's a great way to support people who put out ongoing content, who give it away for free, and also need to pay their bills in the process of giving that away. And that's where we fit in. So thank you guys for supporting us on Patreon. Thank you also for your support in bookmarking our Amazon link. So many of you guys are doing that, and we're so thankful for that. You can click on our link on Amazon. If you go to extremehealthradio.com, there's a link on the right-hand side. Click on that and then bookmark that link, and then use that bookmark every single time you make an Amazon purchase, and that helps support the show. Man, you guys rock. So thank you for that. And also, I want to thank you guys for supporting us by going to our store where we sell the sauna, the rebounder, we sell low blue light glasses, we sell the grounding bed sheets, the Berkey water filters. We sell blenders and juicers and all kinds of really cool stuff in the store. Surthrival products, Dr. Jack Kruse mentioned. Find a Spring, that's put together by our good friend Daniel Vitalis over from Surthrival. We sell all of his products. So thank you guys for checking out our store whenever you're in the market to purchase something online for your health. So thanks for checking out us first, seeing if we carry it, and then if we do, just clicking on our link and making your purchase, and that supports us. So you guys rock. Thank you for that. Let's see, anything else to get to? Let me just do a real quick thing of our schedule. We have a great schedule coming up next week. Today's a special Saturday show. We've got Sarah Banta coming up. She's going to be published today. That was an episode yesterday where we talked about accelerated silver and the benefits of the ketogenic diet, and pretty fascinating information. Then we have Brandy Vaughn from learntherisk.org, Big Pharma vaccines and vaccine mandates. That's going to be fascinating. And then next week we have Craig Carroll, and he wrote a whole book about the toxic chemical benzene and the 38 years of insulin-dependent diabetes he had with his wife, and the effects of chemical benzene in his life. So, wow. Really interesting people. So thanks, guys. We really appreciate it. We love you all. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing our show. Thanks for your, giving us reviews and rating us on iTunes and following us on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook, all that stuff. You guys rock. Thank you. We love you, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
No material on this blog is intended to suggest that you should not seek professional medical care. Always work with qualified medical professionals, even if you educate yourself in the field of live food, nutrition, and alternative medicine. I'm not a doctor, nor am I offering readers medical advice of any kind. None of the information offered here should be interpreted as a diagnosis of any disease, nor an attempt to treat or prevent any disease or condition. While information